Hello there! Welcome to another video for Super Factory Manager. Today I'm going to be trying to fix issue number 430, which is the fancy inventory cable is connecting visually to blocks that it should not, including air. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is open up the IDE, and in this case I'm using the Community Edition, and I'm not going to update it because that sometimes just breaks stuff. So for now, we are in a good spot because the most recent commit on the code was publishing the last release, so it's not like there's any unreleased stuff that's going to get in the way of us publishing a fix for this issue. So when I opened up IntelliJ, I have a workspace open for each of the game versions that Super Factory Manager supports. So it's going to take a second to open all of them here. And the organization of these windows is not the greatest, but we will make do. So I've already identified the root cause of the issue, where the user provided the game version is 1.21.1, and I looked at the code and I noticed that it is, when it checks if the block has a capability in any direction, I added a redstone capability that's not in use yet, but it's present in the code. So it's detecting that every block has redstone support, which is kind of true. So we want to exclude this when we're doing the check on whether or not the fancy inventory cables should connect to adjacent blocks. We're going to start the fix on 1.19.2, which is somewhere in here. I have the monitor scaling up super high so that we can actually see everything. So here we are. So we have no pending changes, and we're going to start the game and just make sure that we can actually reproduce the issue on this version, because I only reproduced it on 1.21.1, but my understanding is that it should affect all the versions. And if not, then between the oldest and the newest supported version would be where we have to narrow down when the problem is introduced. So we're running in debug mode here, which means we can reload any changes we make to the code without having to relaunch the game. And that is using enhanced class redefinition. So if we look at the build.gradle, in the JVM args, we have allow enhanced class redefinition, and the JetBrains runtime that I'm using is JBR17, which supports the additional JVM args, which lets us add and remove methods and stuff at runtime. So that's probably not going to be super important, but sometimes it's relevant. So if we're setting up your own environment to work on Super Factory Manager, you would probably want to make sure that you also have that JetBrains runtime, just because it's cool. So in our super flat world, we're just going to place some fancy inventory cables and make sure that they are demonstrating the problem. The other thing is when you hit run, there's IntelliJ tries to be nice with the thing, like the log output, and it's counterproductive because we want to see the full logs. We have to click this every time to actually see what's going on. So we have a nice empty world, and we're going to cheat in the fancy inventory cable. So we'll notice that in 1.19.2, when we place it, it is not connecting. So if we go to 1.21.1, it should demonstrate the problem. So between these versions, something has changed that is going to be our root cause. And I suspect it might be in 1.20.3. In a previous video, people commented that my window management was painful, so I am working on a fix for that. So I have the ability to list windows, so if I wanted to focus or build an app that could focus the different IntelliJ windows, then I have it able to do it programmatically there. It's just haven't quite finished that. So the idea would be that we could have an overview where these windows are alphabetized instead of being as they are. So while this is loading, Looks like I have some breakpoints causing some noise. So in 1.20.3, the issue is manifesting. So if we go to 1.20.2, it will hopefully not be present. That's the other thing, is that when Gradle syncs on some of the older versions, it doesn't correctly set the, whatever this is, the class path or source set or whatever for the thing. So on the run client, we want to be using main, and then on run data, we want data gen, because the main one includes the sources for the game tests. So now we're loading another version of the game. So we have our list of windows, which we can map to title. We can pick, and then we want to split that to get the last, or the first part, so that we can focus any window. So I want just the inventory cables. So on 1.20.2, it does not manifest, but on 1.20.3, it does manifest. And this is likely because in 1.20.3, the capability stuff was reworked quite heavily. So to continue to diagnose this, in the newer version, so 1.20.3, which is you, we want to look at how those cables work. So if we go to the capability discovery, I know that the fancy inventory cables are using the any direction. So has any capability, any direction. That is what is being used for the fancy cable block. So in the has connection for the cable block, which takes a level accessor, a block position, and a direction, we check if the block relative to that direction. So if we have our block, we're going to go to the next block over in that direction, and if it's a cable block, then it automatically has a connection. And if our level is not valid, like the level has to be a level extension for us to check if it has capabilities. So if it's not that, we'll return false. And then we want to check if that block has any capability, so the block next to the cable. So if we are checking this cable, then we're looking at the down direction. We're going to be checking this dirt block and seeing if that has any capabilities in any direction. So this call is returning true on 1.20.3 and false on 1.20.4, presumably. So we can actually check our assumptions. So on 1.20.3, when we place a cable, this will get called, and we can evaluate that to see it's true. And then on 1.20.2, if we go to our fancy cable block, so our has connection call for 122, break those, and when we place, our breakpoint's not getting hit, which is odd. So if we put the breakpoint higher, it does get hit. So if the block entity is null, it's returning false. So the logic between 122 and 123 is actually different. So if we side by side these, it is checking if it's a cable block, so that's the same, and then it's checking if it's a level extension, which is not the same. And the ways, so on the older versions, capabilities come from the block entity, so it makes sense that if there's no block entity that we would return false, but that's not quite entirely true, because on 1.20.2 we have support for cauldrons. So if we resume the game and turn off our breakpoints for a second, and if we place a cauldron, then that means this cable is not going to connect. However, if we have a cauldron filled with lava, Super Factory Manager is able to interact with that. So there is the thing there to consider. So if we were to replace that with that and get a bucket. We drain this cauldron, and we need to label. So if we place the lava in there, it is moving, despite there not being a visual connection. So ideally, we'd want that visual connection to always align. So to do that, we probably want to make the older code look like the newer codes. We won't assert that there's a block entity because this has any capability is going to check that for us. However, what we've observed in the new version is that this is returning true even for air blocks, which is not what we want. And the reason that's doing so is because we can continue to step through this. So if we see, so this is the client level, what is our direction here? North. And if we step into this, so we have a position and a level, and we are streaming the capabilities. So Super Factory Manager has the registry of resource types. So that includes items, fluids, forge energy, redstone. So this is the new one that's not actually being used by much, but this is causing the problem. And other mods can register things to this registry if they wanted to. So when we are streaming the capabilities here, so we're getting the registry, streaming it, and getting the capability kind of that resource type, we are checking if any of those capability kinds for any of the directions will return something. So as we step into this, so for each of the directions, we are evaluating at this position, which is north of the fancy cable. We are checking if there is a capability that is present at that direction. So we want to continue to step either until we get here or here, so we can just hit play. So we're returning false for item handler, and if we hit play again, we're going to step through. So fluid, false, energy, false, redstone storage, true. So in this direction on 1.20.3, we're getting a capability result that is true here. And this, so ideally we'd want to actually backtrack a little bit and step into this call. So if we put the breakpoint there, we can just drop the frame and play again. So now we're here for redstone storage, and if we jump into the discover capability, so we're looking for the redstone capability kind at that position from the null direction. So we get the block state and the block entity. So in this case, there isn't a block entity because the block state is air. So for each of the providers of this kind, so the kind is redstone storage, and the block capability providers is, so we have redstone and block entity. Then when we get the capability, so in this case, we're trying for the redstone one, our redstone support is going to get the signal. So every block state has the get signal method, which is why the redstone capability is present for every block. So in the process of checking if the has any capability, any direction, in this case, this method is used in 3 locations. So if we look at those locations, there's the fancy cable block, which determines if the cable should visually connect to that block. And then there's linting. So when we're linting a program and saying whether or not a label is being used, but there's no capability detected there, that is also where this method's being used. So if we turn off our breakpoints and run a program, so if I say A is there, then that didn't cause an error. So that should be, oh, that's because this method is detecting that A has a capability because it has the redstone capability. Whereas if we go to this method, so in 1.20.3, where we have the has any capability, any direction, if we update this method to exclude the redstone capability, that is not going to negatively affect all the locations where this method is used, because we also want that exclusion to apply for the label not connected warning. So in order to exclude it, when we're iterating the capabilities, we want to filter out the redstone capability, which we can do. So as we're streaming these capability kinds, we can just filter, not such that SFM block capability kind, that comes from what? So we have the redstone resource type, and that uses the redstone handler. So we want the SFM well-known capabilities, redstone handler, capability kind, not such that cap equals this. So inconvertible types, block capability kind, block capability. Why is that different? Oh yes, because that was the inner thing. So that should fix it. So now in 1.20.3, when we, oh, the label change we did was 122. I'm a little strange that the warning is not present, because usually if I had a program, so if we say move one stack and we replace the barrel with a brick, then that should give a warning that A is connected by cables but is not a valid inventory. So for some reason, either the labels aren't being updated or it's not detecting that as a warning, which we can investigate afterwards. But in 1.20.3, we just fixed it. So now, whoops, it is not incorrectly connecting to the other blocks. And we can turn off our filter and reload and see that it unfixes the problem. So that looks to be working appropriately. So this method is used by the linting and by the fancy cable to determine if a connection should be visually displayed. So when the redstone support actually comes in, and if you were using this to check a comparator level or a redstone signal from a block, it's not going to visually connect. So if we reload this, place another cable, Super Factory Manager will eventually be able to read the redstone stuff, even though it won't be connecting. But that's going to be a minority of use cases. In most scenarios, we don't want the fancy cable to visually connect to these blocks. So that is the fix. But the other part of this is that in the older version, so 1.20.2, even though the cauldron does not have a capability, or does not have a block entity, we would still want the fancy cable to connect in this scenario. And that code, to update it, really, we want to update the oldest version such that this method is, when it's being called by the fancy cable block, we don't filter out the block entity here, because some block entities are not present for blocks which do have capabilities that we use. So if we remove that call and reload this, it should now demonstrate the same problem. So this is 1.19.2, which we do have open here. So now we're getting the bug because we have to re-implement the fix over here from 1.20.3 by including the filter here. So if we apply this change, it will now fix that correctly. And when we run the cauldron, it now visually connects. Even though the cauldron does not have a block entity, it does have a capability that Super Factory Manager was able to discover because it has the fluid capability. So that is our desired outcome. And now we have to apply that fix everywhere. So we can commit our changes. So we are going to put this in a new version. Oh my. So we are fixing the bug here. So that's 430. So we fixed number 430 where the fancy cable block improperly visually connects to the blocks it should not. And then we will commit our changes. So the other thing I want to do is investigate that label warning thing, because if we have a block that's trying to be read from and that block does not support our capability, that is giving us the warning. But if we do the same thing on 1.20.2, do we get the same warning? So we replace that with that, looking at the labels, that should be A. There is no warning. So for some reason, that warning is not being present on 1.20.2. So between 1.19.2 and 1.20.2, there was some problem with the warnings. And we can determine that by going to 1.20.2 and determining when the warnings are being built. So this, where is it? So in a program builder, no, the disk item. So the disk item has the set warnings method. So when we compile and update errors and warnings, let's just see if this is being called. So we want to see what happens inside our success case. So if we want to update warnings, which we do, then we are going to gather all the warnings from the program linter. So that we can step into. So we'll create a problem tracker, and then for each of the linters, it is going to gather the warnings. So the linter that we're expecting was the same one that's using the has any capability. So the label not connected program linter is the one we want to check for. So in our code, we want to skip until we get to that one. And we can actually so now when we hit play, we'll get to that one. So when we gather the warnings, so the way this one works is that we are going to get the cable network manager, get the cable network for that manager, and then let's step into this. So we have the labels, the entry set, which is the map of the label to the positions that label has. For each of those positions, if it is adjacent to a cable and it does not have a capability, then we're going to add the warning. So for some reason, it is not doing that properly. Rather, it's not, the code is being ran, but it's not giving the warning. So let's just step through and see what's going on. So the label A is the left-hand side. So this is the one that should have the problem. So it has one position. And is that adjacent to a cable? Yes, which is correct. And then does it have a capability? Yes. So if not, it would cause an error. So why is this saying yes? That's because this version does not have the fix from the older version. So I think what we need to do at this point is propagate the changes, because this is getting a little out of hand. So if we go to the Super Factory Manager repo for the oldest version, we can run the act.ps1 script, which will give us a list of actions, and I want to propagate changes. So this will take all the stuff from the 1.19.2 version and bring it forward to 1.19.4, and then bring 1.19.4 to 1.20. So that's going to do that for each of the versions until they're all synced up. So when we run this, this is going to correctly tell us that we have uncommitted changes in 1.20.3. And to fix that, we can actually undo the fix we did here because we reapplied it for the older version. So we are going to discard this change. And then when we run the propagate changes action again, it will now do the commit. So now that code has made it all the way to 1.20.3 where there's now a merge conflict, because this is when a lot of the capability stuff got reworked. So let's close all these tabs and then solve our merge conflict. So for the fancy cable block, this is where we decided that we will no longer check for block entities. And on 1.20.3, we weren't checking for block entities anyways. So down here, the old version just made sure that the level extension, or sorry, that the level is a level extension, because the signature of this changed, or the way the capability stuff works is that you query the capabilities from the level, not the block entity anymore. So because we have a level accessor here, that doesn't guarantee that it's a level extension, which is required for capability querying. Whereas in the old one, before 1.20.3, 1.3, the level accessor could give you block entities, and block entities could give you capabilities. So there was no need for the instance of check. So we want to keep the old version because the new version, or sorry, we want to keep the old code from the new version because the old version doesn't need that check. So we'll discard that change, and then we need to update the imports at the top. So now that change has been merged. And in the capability discovery, what's gone on here is the addition of the filter here, whereas the signature of the method is the level extension. So having the method parameters on new lines makes the diffing on this a lot easier. So that's why in Super Factory Manager I have it configured to format the code with a lot of kind of blank spaces, because it makes the diffs less stupid sometimes. So we're going to definitely accept the change in signature and accept the filter from the fixed version. And we're also checking if it's not an instance of a level, which is interesting because we're already passing in the level extension, so I'm not sure what's going on there. So if we copy that, why is this complaining? Inconvertible types cannot cast level extension to level. Maybe it's the imports at the top. So that fixed that warning. And then down here, the only difference is the addition of our filter. So we can otherwise discard those changes, and then we want to keep the rest of the changes from the left-hand side. We can actually click that way, same thing. So why is this check here? So we're passing in level because discover capabilities from level. So we can't really control-click to go to definition in the merge window. So what we'll do is we'll go to this symbol outside the merge window. So inside here, we need a level to check discover capabilities from level, which means that this has any capability any direction, which in 1.19.2 previously accepts a level accessor. In here, we could keep the old signature. So if we instead check level accessor, it's the same thing except the call site no longer has to do our instance of check on the old version. So in the fancy cable, we no longer need that because we can just pass in our level, because the method now accepts a level accessor and then it does the level check. So that will keep it consistent with keeping the version dependent behavior inside here, because this discover capability from level takes a level accessor, whereas in the new version that takes a level because the level has the that's where the capabilities come from. So a little mixed up now. So in our merge, what we did was in the block capability discovery, we no longer take the level extension, we instead take that because we're already doing the instance of check here, which means we don't have to do it before we pass in the level to this method. So that will update the fancy cable block, which will now exactly equal the old version. So this is no longer version dependent behavior, even though it was missing the annotation anyways. So that looks good. So we're merging 1.20.2 into 1.20.3, and we need to continue all the way up to the latest versions. So in this case, there's no further merge conflicts, which is good. And now if we look at the example of the label being weird, so A and B, this correctly warns us that A is assigned in the world and is connected by cables, but is not detected as a valid inventory. So then we want to make sure that 1.20.2 is also demonstrating that now. So label is assigned in the world, but it's not detected, which is correct and good. And 1.20.3 So now when we replace A, we look at the warnings, label A is assigned in the world and is connected by cables but is not detected as a valid inventory. So that is also correct, because previously this was giving the redstone capability, which meant the warning did not happen, but now that we've filtered out the redstone capability, everything is hunky-dory. So if we look at our release process, now that we've made all our changes, we want to push them. So we can also mention that we fixed winter. Let's see what. Label not connected by program. Linker. Never warning because redstone capability. So that looks pretty good. So we'll just say update changelog. So now we want to publish this code. So the release process, we want to update the known issues. So in this case, I don't think any of the stuff has changed from the release I did 4 days ago. Then we want to update the GitHub milestone name. So in GitHub, this should be under milestone 4.28.0. And let's create 4.29.0. So anything in 4.28, we're probably going to move to 4.29 because it is not the time. So everything except for you. Can I not bulk assign in this? Instead, go to the issues and then filter the issues by the milestone. All of these can be dealt with at a later time. So now, can you be present in multiple milestones? Why is that? There, we just had to run the search again. So now, just in this milestone is going to be that, which is correct. So we've updated milestone bump mod version, some Gradle properties. This becomes 4.28.0. Update heading and changelog. So sometimes I'll put pre in here while I'm still working on that version just to visually signal to myself, but in this case we're good. Update thank you. In this case I don't think I've received any additional sponsorships, so that should be unchanged. Then we want to commit the bump. We want to propagate changes. So now that properties, Gradle.properties will be applied to each of the different versions. And run data. So in this case, we did not change any of the data gen, so we don't have to do that. But what that usually means is that when we run data, that will run our code generation, which will give us the generated source set. So that is where a lot of the textures and block states and stuff come from, because this can change between the different versions. So in Super Factory Manager, we have block states, data gen stuff. So this will run code to generate those JSON files in a way that always correctly generates the JSON structure for the given Minecraft version. But we didn't change any of that, so this shouldn't matter. And in fact, running this should show that there's no git changes afterwards, and we can do the same thing on a later version too for completeness. So we go over here and run data. There should be no changes in git after this happens. And then after running data, we'd usually propagate changes, and then we want to run the game test server for all the versions. So that ensures that there's no problems. So while that is going to run, this is going to take a while, because it sequentially runs each version, and it's just not very quick, but usually I just go watch a YouTube video or something while that runs. So we're asking a lot of the computer right now. We're running data on 2 different versions and doing the game tests. So in this case, the data gen finished and there's no changes, and if we go to the newer version as well, we can ignore all these warnings because they are for the event bus subscriber, which is in new versions, you don't have to declare if it's the mod versus game bus. And in the game test discovery, I've created my own annotation which does the same thing, because on older versions, you can't have, or rather, you must mention the bus that it's meant to go on, but in the new versions, it simply detects that based on the kind of event. So if this event is a mod bus event or a game bus event, it's able to detect that, so I was able to re-implement that logic so that we can have an annotation that does not change between the different Minecraft versions. So on the to-do list is to switch over to that for each of the event bus stuff. So on the old ones, you need the event bus subscriber, and then you need the subscribe event annotation, whereas mine just has subscribe event, or SFM subscribe event, or whatever. But we can change that later. So our game tests are currently running. So all tests passed for 1.19.2, and now it's going to go on to the next version. So when this runs, it does the little graphic here. So these are all the different game tests, and then they're still running, and then once they all get to complete, everything is happy, and it says all required tests pass. Whereas if there's a warning or an error, it says an error, and the PowerShell script I'm using will detect the error and stop running them sequentially so we can investigate and fix it. So that process is going to take a while, so we can review our release process. So after that, we're going to build and collect all the jars and upload them to the various services. For each of the versions, we're going to manually test them to ensure that no shenanigans are going on. Because sometimes the built artifact does not behave the same as when you run it in IntelliJ, so we want to actually test the jars to make sure that the core gameplay mechanics of Super Factory Manager are working. So labeling a block, having a program that just moves everything from A to B, which is why I didn't notice the fancy cables changing the way they did to introduce this bug, is because it just wasn't part of the manual testing that I was doing. There was a decent amount of stuff changed in the previous version, so I don't think any of this explicitly mentions the fancy cable, but the way the underlying capability stuff changed is, I guess it just caused the bug to manifest. So in this case, it should be a quick turnaround time. And now it's a matter of waiting. In theory, this could be parallelized, and we can parallelize in a different way by using this time to do something else. So in a different terminal, the thing we were doing earlier, which was this. So we can list all the windows and have Fuzzy Finder pick from them. And we can also filter out where the window title is not empty. So by this point, we should probably write a script for this. So let's cd. So let's make a pick window. So in here, we have the list of all windows. It's equal to that. We'll convert it to JSON. And then we want to filter out windows with empty title. And then we want to format title, pick with Fuzzy Finder, and then we want to extract the hardware, or the identifier from the selected line, and then focus the window with the selected hardware using. Yeah, that looks good. So, is this directory in my bin? I forget. But either way, we can do... Welcome back. I ran out of disk space for a moment there, but I was able to move some stuff. So now, let's double check what's going on here. So it's on 1.20.3, so it's still checking all the game tests. And we are working on this pick window script. So when we run this, it will give us every window that has a name. So if I wanted 1.20.1, then when I hit enter, it'll focus that window. So now the next part is, how do I make that run when I press a hotkey or something? So that would be interesting, because one thing we could do, like, it's T. What is T? T is tree or something. What would I want the hotkey for that to be? W? W is nothing. So let's double check if this is in bin. So now I've added the script directory to my path, which means we can pick window from anywhere. And then the next thing we want to do is add an alias for that. So now when I hit W, we get there, which means we can focus stuff quickly. Although, I don't quite know where that window is. So if I say 1.20, then that seems to be working. Great. However, our game test failed for 1.20.4, and what went wrong? Falling Anvil XP shard. So if we go to 1.20.4, and we run client, we can inspect that visually and see what's going on. Now there's a chance that the bug does not reproduce, which would be annoying, but looking at the logs, do we get a message? So in 1.20.4, that saves the logs here. I thought test.log. So it failed, expected shards to be produced. That's not a very descriptive message. What am I doing? So the found entities was empty. So it passes when we run it this way. What about when we run it with all the other tests? Everything just froze. Not cool. Is it going to crash or is it going to stay frozen? I don't know what that was. So all the tests passed. Let's see if they freeze again, because that was weird. That's why I have the run speed set so high, so that I can actually get around this quickly. So it didn't freeze this time, which is good. Let's chalk it up to a fluke. So running it twice very quickly causes problems, which doesn't surprise me, but if we run it normally, then it succeeds. And so it succeeds when we're in the same chunk. There, it just did the freeze thing again. And when we're in a different chunk, it still succeeds. So I'm going to have to assume that that was just a bug in the test itself. Maybe if the item has a specific velocity that can get it outside the bounding box of the test area, because this is only grabbing entities from the position of the anvil inflated by 3. So really, that's a pretty big area. So the item would have to get launched for it to exit the area by the time the check happens. So I don't know why it failed, but we're just gonna pretend it didn't. The other thing we can do is run the game test server and see if this fails when ran this way, because this is running on a dedicated server with no kind of player in the way, and this is running it through IntelliJ, whereas this harness runs the Gradle task, which is different sometimes. So the other thing we can do is run the task instead of the run configuration, which might have a different outcome. So running it through IntelliJ passed, but if we run it through the Gradle task, it also passed. So we're just gonna say not to worry about it. So when we were running the tests, we got to 1.20.4, so now we need to run 1.20. I'm gonna just do it this way. We just want 1.21.0. And 1.21.1. Which one's this? So 1.20.2 might be frozen in the debugger. Yes, so we can just stop that. 1.21.1 succeeded the game test, and 1.21.0 also succeeded. So now we can go back to our release process. So we ran the game test server for all versions. So now I run the build command for every version except 1.21.5. So this will go through each of them and run Gradle build, and Gradle build will run the unit tests because so there's the game tests which live under the game test source set. And then there's also the test tests, which are just like Java tests or JUnit. And that gets ran when the build command runs. So what just failed? So it probably didn't like me running this because it's also open in this one. So we'll just let this run normally, which means we have more time to wait. So after we build, then we're going to collect all those jars and manually test each of the game versions before we upload it to the CurseForge and the Modrinth and the GitHub issues, or GitHub releases. So there is a hotkey, Windows key tilde opens this, and then we can hit W and get our thing. So that's pretty slick for an alternate to Alt-Tab when we have a bunch of hard to distinguish windows open. All right, 5 minutes later, we have all of our jar files. So those are each in the individual locations. So in 1.19.2 under build, we can reload this. I thought it was, oh, sorry, under build, not bin, under build lib, we have our new jar file. So this, if we reload, contains 4.28.0. So each of the individual versions has this jar file in their locations. And what we can do is we can wipe the jar summary directory and collect the jars and then open the jar directory. So that action script just copied all of the jar files into this one location, which is great. So now we want to test each of these versions. So if we look at our changelog, or sorry, our release process, after we build, we ran the wipe jars summary directory action, and then we collected all the jars. Now we want to update the Prism and test servers to use the latest build output. So we'll update Prism, and update test servers. So now We're going to launch Prism. So this is where we have the different versions. So we're going to launch 1.19.2, and we're going to launch test server for every version. So this is going to spin up a local dedicated server for the different game versions, because when you're running in single player, you may not crash when you would crash if you were running on a dedicated server. For example, if you were to access a client class on the server, that causes problems. So if you're running in single player, you won't notice those problems. So instead we create the server, and then for each of the versions, we're going to launch the version from Prism, we're going to join it on localhost, we're going to break whatever is existing, and we're going to place a new setup, and we're going to check the changelog works, and then we're going to stop the server, and we'll go to the next version. So in 1.19.2, we're going to connect to our server. And we're going to break whatever's previously here. So when I loaded in, when I was releasing the thing, I saw these fancy cables and that they did not have the problem. But as we observed, the problem only manifests on 1.20.3, where I did not have any of that setup placed. So for now, all we need to do is just place some chests in the disk. So if you look at the changelog, we have 4.28.0, but really we just want a simple program where we can input A to B, and we observe that it is working. And that's about all that we need to do. So that tells us that the textures are working, that the capabilities are working, that the core kind of gameplay mechanics are there. And then we can stop, quit Prism, we'll go to here and we'll hit any key to start the next one, and we'll go to Prism and we'll launch the next game version. Sometimes that happens and I don't quite understand it. Let's just try this again. We validated that the changelog works and that the textures and the core stuff works. Stop, start the next server, and move on. Now, I'm realizing that we should be placing the fancy cables as part of our test, because that is the actual thing that we're trying to ensure was fixed. And so we checked it on 1.19.2. I guess we'll just ignore the fact that we didn't technically check it for 1.19.4, but who plays that version anyways? So inside here, we'll have a chest connected by fancy cables. So that visually looks correct. And it works. And the changelog looks correct. Now, for 1.20.3, this will be an important one to check. So the fancy cables are doing what they should, and if we have a cauldron, they should also be connecting, which they do. Woohoo! And the changelog looks good. Everything is as it should be. Almost done. It's interesting to observe how much faster the newer ones load than the older ones. So I just enjoy that. What do we need? Disk, you. Nice. So if we look at our release process, we did for each version and it worked. So now we need to tag. So that will tag each of the repos with the with the version of Super Factory Manager pulled from the Gradle.properties and from the game version. So then we need to push all. So this will push each of the branches to the repo. And currently this is not using git work trees, so this is just changing directory into each folder and running the git commands. And then for each of the versions, so now is the uploading part. So we're going to upload to CurseForge, to Modrinth, and to a new GitHub release. So for each of the CurseForge uploads, there's a few properties that we need to set. There's the environment, the mod loader, Java, and the changelog. So the changelog comes from this. So we want to have our jar directory next to our CurseForge page. So we're going to upload 1.19.2. That is a server and a client mod for Forge, for Java 17, for Minecraft 1.19.2. So this process is one that I want to automate and just haven't gotten around to it. We'll put the changelog in code block, so we set it to Markdown and publish immediately, and then we publish it. So we're going to do this for each of the files. What's going on? If I refresh the page, it might double submit, which is not what I would want. Error uploading file. Let's just reload the page. Well, I'm glad that worked, because if that didn't work, I would be low on options. So if we look at the notes for this, the Minecraft version is obvious, and then the mod loader on 1.21 is Forge and NeoForge, because they maintain parity just for that version, and then afterwards it's NeoForge. And for 1.21, it's Java 21, otherwise it's Java 17. And Modrinth does not ask for those version infos, so we only really care about that for CurseForge. There is an API for this, and there is tools that other people have made that use like Gradle and stuff to do this, but I will at some point make my own CLI for this. Just because the way the existing tools expect the changelog to be present or whatever, they probably will not accommodate the weird setup that I have. Plus, I just enjoy writing that kind of stuff. So now we have all of those files that are under review, and we can look at the previous ones to get some interesting insights. So the downloads we have for 4.27, which is the most recent one. So that's not going to have as much numbers. But if we look at 4.26, we can see that 1.21 has 1.9 million downloads, and then 1.21 not .1 has 70. So not a lot of people are on that version, but why drop support when we have it all working nice and snazzy? So 1.20.4, not a lot of people until we get to 1.20.1 with a lot of people. And then 1.19.2 has a non-zero amount of people. So everyone gets to enjoy Super Factory Manager updates, even the 10 or 14 people, because part of the reason that the different, like it's nice to maintain the different versions is because for all the different things that change between the versions, like in 1.20.3, the capability stuff is updated, or in 1.19.4, some of the GUI widgets or whatever are changed. So being able to incrementally update the features lets us develop on 1.19.2 and have everything be supported across all the versions. And if we were to only support the newest version, then we would still be doing the porting of the code anyways. Like we still have to port the stuff. So the way that we have it with the propagate changes command is that it costs us basically nothing to develop on 1.19.2 and then just support every version that comes afterwards that we've created the branch for and set it up for. So if we look at our changelog process, our release process, so for each version we've uploaded that, and then we need to do the same for modrinth. So under modrinth, geez, come on, we want our jars directory. So I'm logged in, we're going to upload a version. So the upload process on modrinth is a little easier. So we pick the file and it detects the game version from the file, and we just X out the versions that we don't care about, and then we paste our changelog. So somewhere in here is the create button. Then that brings us to the page. We click the versions to get back to the page where we can drag and drop the new file, paste the changelog, and make sure everything's good. But you'll notice is that for 1.20 or whatever, it adds all the 1.20 versions. So we have to X out till we get just the one that we want. And then when we get to 1.20.1, it only lists Forge, so we have to add NeoForge. And then for 1.20.2, it's only going to list Forge, so we have to X Forge and add NeoForge. But it won't add 1.20.1 when we have the 1.20.2 file. So it knows the versions before this one don't make sense, but it does add all the versions afterwards, which isn't necessarily true. It's not like a 1.20.3 file will be guaranteed to work on 1.20.4. And then for 1.21, it does default to NeoForge correctly. So interestingly, it did keep 1.21 when we had the 1.21.1 file. So now we have all our modrinth files, which look correct. So up to 1.21, it's all Forge, and then 1.21 and after is all NeoForge. And then we have the GitHub release. So for this, if we refresh this page, we should be able to select the tag for 4.28.0, and then we'll paste our changelog, and we will upload our jars. And we can click and drag to upload them, but that puts them in a random order. So I like to do them one at a time so that they are in proper sequence. So for each version, we've uploaded to modrinth, and then we've created a new GitHub release. And then we want to close the GitHub milestone. what is this? This can go to our next milestone. Why is this still showing? Whatever. And so our closed issue is this, which is correct because we fixed it. So in our git commit, when we mentioned the number, it closed it automatically, which is good. Sometimes I'll reopen it if I'm not going to release soon, and I'll add the awaiting release label to it so that it's still easily discovered by people who are having the issue when it may have been fixed in the code but not in a published version of the jar file. So now we can close milestone, which means all the stuff that's probably going to be done in the future or done soon is in this new milestone that we created to move everything that I thought was going to be done soon until I decided to do this. So looking at this, we've closed the milestone. We already have the new milestone, and we have no issues with the fixed awaiting release label, which we can double check by going here. So there is a closed issue, which we can remove this from. But otherwise, that is the new version. So then the next part is to draft a changelog. We have our changelog message, a brief description of the changelog, and we want to mention the people who are subscribed to these announcements, and we also probably want to include a emoji. Now, usually I would wait before sending the announcement post message to ensure that all the versions are approved, but CurseForge is pretty good about approving these quickly. So it looks like this one's still under review, but by the time anyone actually sees the announcement and cares to download it, it should be ready. We can also include a link to the issue. So who was the one who gave the report? It was you. So that should be good. We send the announcement and publish it to everyone who is subscribed. So in summary, that is a quick rundown on how a release of Super Factory Manager gets made. Hope you enjoyed. As a quick bonus, I will also mention that I have in Prism an instance where I can grab the latest version from CurseForge so that we can actually test end-to-end that everything is working properly. Go to the mods, Super Factory Manager, and if we check for updates, we can get the newest version from CurseForge, and then we can launch the game and make sure that everything is working completely end-to-end.